The title of our talk is Mapping Concepts Engineering Students in China Use to Think About Ethics. To improve global engineering ethics education, it's necessary to understand how engineering students across cultures think about ethics, since this can vary as a result of culture. A website, therefore, was set up to conduct large-scale research on cross-cultural moral psychology, as well as host educational contents on global engineering ethics. Network analysis and semantic maps were used to explore open-ended responses to two prompts. First, give an example of a behavior you consider prototypically unethical, and second, explain what makes this behavior unethical. Preliminary results seem to indicate that engineering students in China conceive of unethical behaviors as ones where companies negatively affect people through their products, and that the harmful, other regarding nature of these behaviors is what makes them unethical. Previous research has explored first how conceptions of ethics vary across and within cultures and among engineering students, and second, how this would be important to engineering and technology ethics. Versus fixed response multiple choice questions used for most large-scale studies, items in this work do not limit possible responses. The participants in our study were undergraduate engineering majors taking a semester. Data for analysis comes from free response, reflection questions interspersed throughout readings hosted on that website. The title of the website is the Center for Global Applied Ethics. And the questions and readings come from the text Global Engineering Ethics by Heinz Lugenbiel and myself. These are used on the website with the permission of us, the authors, and the publisher. Text responses to the what and why prompts were first spell-checked and standardized for US English, and then tokenized using the unnest tokens function in the TidyText package for R. This stripped the text of punctuation, converted upper to lowercase letters, and assigned term IDs based on the participant from which they came. The anti-join function was then applied to remove common stop words. Lists of terms appear in the responses were then reviewed and synonyms standardized. The shortest variants of words were used, for example, singular versus plural nouns, so technology rather than technologies, and the root form of verbs, so harm rather than harms, harmed, or harming. Word lists were then turned into adjacency matrix and loaded into Gephi, an open source software for network analysis to create and manipulate semantic maps. In each matrix, the co-occurrence of terms in different participants responses were treated as undirected edges in a network with edge weights equal to the number of times a word co-occurred in response by different participants. Node and edge colors reflect communities, and node and label size are based on term centrality within the network. The color and width of edges represent the frequency of word co-occurrence between different participant responses. This will make more sense once I show you and we begin talking about the semantic maps themselves. Okay, here's a bit more information about what we got from this. So the responses to the what prompt is give an example of a behavior you consider prototypically unethical. In other words, what's an example of an ethical behavior? We're between 1 and 135 English language words with a mean response length of 20.8 words. Responses to the why prompt. That prompt was, what makes this an example of an unethical behavior, or why is this an unethical behavior? We're between 3 and 106 English language words with a mean response length of 27.6. Graphs of these networks were too big to discuss meaningfully, so a set of simplified graphs were developed for each network. These were filtered using the giant component in Gephi. This consists in keeping only components with the most nodes and further excluding any nodes with a connection of less than 2. Okay, so here are the two resulting semantic maps. Hopefully you guys can see. So figure 1 shows the semantic map of responses to the given example of a behavior you consider prototypically unethical, and then figure 2 shows the semantic map of responses to what is it about this behavior that makes it unethical. Okay, some discussion of these maps. So what do they mean? Regarding examples of unethical behaviors, company was the most central term, so that appears here in the middle of the graph, meaning that it co-occurred in the largest number of responses, followed by people, public, and then product. Product is slightly more central. These words themselves don't refer to behaviors, and given the fact that the sample size was relatively small, only 70, we read through all the individual responses. Based on having read through all the individual responses, the words that we find here, so company, people, public, and then product, seem to indicate that participants generally conceive of unethical behaviors as ones where companies affect people and the public. And so here, just a couple examples of full responses. More of these are included in the paper themselves, and we're happy to make the information that we collected available publicly or to researchers who would be interested. So some internet company take their users' private information without permission and sell them for profit. So an example of a company doing something that harms someone. Produce products of poor quality in the favor of more profits. So again, a company doing something that harms someone else. Term clustered provide further evidence of this focus. For instance, the cluster of terms in blue over here that include infant, Sanlu, and kidney clearly refer to the 2008 China milk scandal, where 6 children died and thousands more were hospitalized after melamine was put in the baby formula. So so originally I thought I would be doing this on a huge screen, and so I could point these out to you and we could discuss them better. I'm not sure if you can see this, but if you turn to the paper itself, you can see these a lot better. So I included high quality photos. So this cluster up here on the upper left hand side in orange, this refers to, it has words like Ukraine, reactor, and radiation, and so this clearly refers to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant meltdown and explosion. And I think part of the reason students refer to this is because there's just this HBO miniseries about it. So throughout the semester, a lot of students wanted to talk to me about this. This one over here in green refers primarily to the environment and damage to the environment and so on and so forth. Okay, so those are responses to the prompt. Here, responses to the why prompt. So people was the most central term, followed by behavior, company, and harm. So again, it's a bit harm and then company. So it's a bit harder to see it on this small screen. Again, we went back through and read the responses, each of the 70 responses, to get a better sense of what this means. These words seem to indicate that unethical behaviors are primarily conceived as other regarding actions that harm people. And again, here are a couple examples of this. First, the behavior of hacker causes damage to the privacy of users as well as the interest of the owners of servers. In the second example, to maximize profit, the company ignores public health. The right of the life should be placed higher than money. And again, if you examine the individual communities that appear, so the groups of words clustered, the red cluster on the left contains many of the same terms related to China, the China milk scandal cluster, for instance, melamine, powder, and infant, and then it has numerous links to harm and law. Similarly, the blue cluster on the far right includes the terms backdoor and collect, with links to private and data, all of which would be related to cybersecurity and data collection. Therefore, cybersecurity, data collection, user privacy would be less central to understandings of ethics because they're further off over here in this sample. Okay, So we set up this site a couple years ago, and we've just started collecting. We just started collecting information in the fall, and so we use this in this course, Global Engineering Ethics, at our institute. We use it for educational purposes, but then it can also be used for research purposes, to do large-scale qualitative studies using techniques associated with the digital humanities. One of the things that we want to do going forward is recruit larger numbers of samples, obviously. So we're using this again for 3 sections of that course I'm teaching this summer. So that has a total of 145 students. We'd like to get students from other cultural groups also. The study sample here was relatively small and homogeneous, comprised by only 70 participants. All of these were undergraduate engineering students, and they were almost exclusively Chinese. Although the website collects demographic information, this information was not used in the current study, just because it's relatively more complicated. We didn't have enough time, given everything that happened with COVID-19, the global pandemic. But like what we could do is go back to these responses that we looked at already, and we could look at differences based on gender. We could look at differences based on whether students were mechanical engineers or electrical and computer engineering students. So those are the 2 majors that we have. Getting larger samples of more diverse populations would allow us to see whether there are points of convergence or divergence. So I think U.S. engineering students are unlikely to list something like the 2008 China milk scandal as a prototypically unethical behavior. So I think that most of them probably don't know anything about that. Interestingly, the terms justice were not used to respond to either prompt. Rights, fair, and unfair comprised only very small nodes in the Y network. So this is interesting. Would we get something else if we had engineering students from France, the Netherlands, the United States, or elsewhere? So we also plan to explore website data using theories from moral psychology, for instance, moral foundations theory, and then the developmental stages schema framework underlying the defining issues test that's been used in a lot of work on engineering ethics and engineering ethics education. So we'd like to bring those frameworks to bear on an analysis of this data to see if there's evidence of different moral foundations within the responses, or whether there's evidence of different types of schema within these responses. Okay, we also think that one could conduct a variety of pedagogical activities based on this research. For instance, presenting and then discussing these semantic maps in real time. It could provide an entertaining way for participants to learn from and about each other, especially if you have groups from different cultural or disciplinary backgrounds, highlighting points of convergence or divergence in understandings of ethics. Okay, good. So I think I got through that with time to spare. And so, yeah, that's basically it. I look forward to any questions that you guys might have during the Q&A. Thanks a lot.